In an enterprise sale, there's two halves to that sale. Firstly is winning the hearts and minds, getting that rapport, getting that understanding and that connection. And then there's a whole second half of that sale, which is your clients might be thinking, I'm having all these fantastic conversations, but nothing's happening. There's something wrong with me. It's actually more of a how can you then go into the step 2, step 3, step 4 of a typical sale.
What are some of the things that you do to increase your chances of getting meetings with the right people?
It comes back to what would they be interested in, what major problem are they looking to solve, and then building some sort of insight around that.
Is there anything that you've seen that are shortcuts, hacks, anything to help you stand out from the competition?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly,
if you would like more corporate clients with bigger budgets, then this episode is for you. Today, I'm sitting down with James Connolly, who has over 10 years experience in business development within big corporates. He's managed accounts at Microsoft, Visual, GlaxoSmithKline, just to name a few, and was also responsible for growing the UK tech unicorn Darktrace from a 4-person business to a 32-person business doing $22 million a year. I met James in Dubai, where he is now based, and we just geeked out on everything business development. And the reason I wanted to bring James onto the podcast is because I haven't found anyone who has this level of business development knowledge mixed in with the experience of selling to corporates. So we talk through best practices. We get James's view on how to actually nurture those relationships, what to do in the tender process, and we really break some of these strategies down. So if you are really looking to break your way into corporates, big blue chip clients with bigger budgets, then this is the episode for you. As always, if you find this valuable, please do hit that subscribe button and share it with a friend. James, so you've managed accounts for GlaxoSmithKline, Visual, and Microsoft, to name a few. I'm curious, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making when they're pitching to corporates?
Lots of things come to mind. I think probably there are sort of 3 main things that I see when working with my clients. And, if I look back at my career, I think firstly, it's realizing when you're engaging and selling larger businesses and especially corporates, what you tend to see is people thinking that it's just 1 or 2 people in the buying process. But usually it's a lot more than that. So a few years ago, when I was at Microsoft, one of the really big methodologies that was sort of rolled out across the company, and there was a book on it was called The Challenger Sale. And that came from a study by CEB, who are now Gartner, that did a massive kind of evaluation of the top performing salespeople in enterprise sales. And what they found was that on average, there's 6.7 people involved in every buying decision and every buying process. Now, as we know, it's not possible to have 0.7 people. So if we round that up, typically 7 people. What happens is that someone can build a really good relationship with someone and think that actually that one person is making the decision, where actually it's a lot more than that and it's a lot more involved. So typically you have to really span across multiple different people. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is around, identifying that stakeholder map. So, exactly who is going to be part of this evaluation, how is it going to happen, and really finding those key roles, because usually organizations, they buy in a process. So it's not just one decision or that was really good, let's go and buy that. Typically there's a defined process, especially for the bigger organizations, because they've got to control spend. They've got to account on things like that. Even for companies that are publicly listed, they have to be very, very clear on how they're buying things, why they buy things. So there's usually a process. So it's really understanding that process and outlining that stakeholder map as well. And then the third thing is something that can be worked on before engaging anyone really, or engaging the market, is that typically, and I go back to this study I mentioned, the buying decision, the buyer is kind of 50 to 75% along the way in making that decision on buying before they have the first meeting. Now that varies by market, but usually about 50% to 75% of that purchasing decision has already been made. So it's extremely important to do things like this, really, in terms of your podcast and talking about what's going on in the market, getting that expertise out there, that insight there, because people will research you, especially if it's one of those 7 that don't know you. That is really, really critical as well. So I think they're the sort of the three mistakes, if you like, that I typically see when working with clients and looking back on my career.
So it's safe to say that when you're selling to larger organizations, sales becomes more complex.
Definitely. Absolutely. And it makes a lot of sense because, typically a corporate business, a large business, they will have a significant budget, a really large budget and they've got to spread that around to all sorts of different departments that need that. So, it could be IT, it could be finance, it could be procurement, business development, marketing. All of these departments, have got their sort of bucket, if you like, and they're asking for that budget for what they're working on. But that has to be controlled. And then how that purchasing decision is made, has to be controlled as well. So I always say that in an enterprise sale, there's 2 halves to that sale. Firstly is the kind of the warm and fuzzy, sort of getting that, winning the hearts and minds. So it's a bit of a corporate phrase, but do you know what I mean? It's sort of really, getting that rapport, getting that understanding and that connection where there's a real understanding and agreement that there's value in the product or service that the buyer is looking at. And then there's a whole second half of that sale, which is very logical. It's very sort of left brain, if you like. It's very kind of step-by-step, process-driven. And the best organizations and the most successful organizations, the most successful people in business development are able to span those 2 halves of a typical sale, if you see what I mean.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So let's get down a little bit into the nitty gritty, because I know people listening will want answers to a few of these questions. The first one that comes to my mind is, out of those 3 things that you mentioned in terms of the biggest mistakes, what are the easiest ones to fix or influence?
It would definitely be around that stat where buyers have basically made their purchasing decision. They're sort of 50%, 75% along. And that can be done through investing in things like the LinkedIn profile. I still cannot believe, Matt, the amount of LinkedIn profiles I come across and there's no photo there, or there's no banner, or there's just been no effort. However, people using that, I have people message me every day and they're active on the platform, but they just haven't really invested the time in, getting a professional photographer for their photo. Really thinking about that banner. Is it relevant for their industry, for example, on LinkedIn? When they then go on to LinkedIn profile, is it about the market and their customers, or is it about them? So, and these changes, that you can do these in an afternoon, really. Yes, there is a little bit of investment, I guess, in, professional photography and things like that. But I think that they're quite straightforward things to complete. And, it's not like people need an opportunity to join a show or something like that, or be on a particular program or something. People can really put their insight out there now pretty easily. The phones that we use now have really advanced cameras, to do sort of just a video on a particular topic, for example. Or if they're at a trade show, maybe just doing a video and sharing some insights and putting that onto their LinkedIn profile, for example, or their other social platforms. And by the way, other social platforms are similar. There is a time invested to develop them and, that look and feel, etc. but that's pretty straightforward. So when that buyer goes on the research journey, they can see that actually they look professional. This seems to be a credible brand, etc. And that's what is can be really valuable.
So it's kind of like you've got to know that when you are entering that market, people are going to research you before they make that purchase. Whereas with a smaller business, maybe I know I've done this where I've bought something from somebody and then afterwards I've sort of been like, hold on, what is it that I've actually bought? Like maybe I've been following them on Instagram or something, and then I go and Google them and see have they got a website or whatever. I haven't actually done that much research into them. It was just that particular offer at the time seemed very relevant for me. So in the corporate world, it's like the importance of being Google friendly, I guess, so that when someone researches you, what you said in that meeting aligns with what it says about you online.
Yeah, absolutely. And making sure that it links up to your area of expertise and your brand as well. So one of the other things that I see, for example, sometimes on social platforms is people putting out stuff that's, wholly personal to them, and that's fantastic. That's great. But again, I'd recommend thinking about the audience and the particular audience, which audience is going to be on that platform, for example, as well, and how they're going to be reviewed. So I just talked about, for example, the LinkedIn, and I talk about LinkedIn because there are a lot of buyers on LinkedIn, and it's just a massive channel for our company, Forward Foundry, is, people going on there and researching you. There's typically a journey of where people go to, and LinkedIn can help you with these things as well, like the featured section, etc., and all those sorts of things. So yeah, I'd absolutely say that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit about some of these mistakes in a bit more detail. So one of the things that you said was that someone's already kind of 50 to 70% along the journey of that purchasing decision. And one of the things that I talk to my clients about is this decision-making process. And for anyone that hasn't heard that, there's kind of 6 stages to it. The first stage is that you're unaware there's a problem. The second stage is that you start to become problem aware. The third stage is that you decide. The fourth stage is you go out and research. Fifth stage is that you make the purchase. And then sixth stage is that you review that purchase. And that's typically if you've ever made a considered purchase, you will go through each one of those steps. And so what you're basically saying is that in a corporate sale, the people making that decision are usually quite far along that decision-making process before they actually purchase. And I'm just wondering, in your experience, is there anything that you can do specifically with corporates to move people back in that process so that when they get further along, you have less competition, or you're less at the whim of, or the mercy, should I say, of their sort of tender process?
Yeah, it's a great point. So I think enterprise sales has obviously gone on a big journey, over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And I think gone are the days now where you sort of, I don't like the phrase, but I think it's quite relevant. It's sort of show up and throw up, kind of thing.
Right.
Where you appear and you say, we do this, we do that, we're brilliant. This is our presentation. This is the demo. What do you think? How do we sort of go forward? What I'd highly recommend now is actually the best conversations in business development are exactly that, just a conversation about the particular topic. How are you finding things? What's been the experience so far? Telling some stories. So, one of the things I work with my clients on are customer stories. That works massively, especially in a highly reference-driven market like the Middle East. And every market is reference-driven, but the Middle East especially so. So, telling a story. So actually saying, well, that sounds similar to another client that I work with. Let me tell you, about, and you don't have to name the client, and obviously we've got to be respectful of NDAs and things like that, but you can tell stories, and I think people really, really pick up on that. I now rarely, I do have a presentation deck, for example, for my own company, but I rarely use it because I think it does certain things, I think the audience see that and go, oh, it's presentation, right? I can relax. I'm quite tired, actually. So I'm just going to switch off for a bit. And so they're not listening. They're probably talking about how they're going to get home, what they're going to have for dinner and things like that. The second thing is it's just purely about you as a supplier and what you know and how fantastic you are, not really about them. And then thirdly, it can eat up a lot of time as well. So depending on, some of the clients I work with, the slide deck is, 20 to 30. And when you're in emerging technology, that's fantastic because people want to talk about the tech and what they're capable of, but that also can affect things as well. One of the things I'd kind of love to leave the audience with is something that I call the golden 2/3. So typically in any first meeting in business development, there is a 2/3 of that meeting should be about the client. So it should be about the problem that they're facing, the challenges, how they've tried to resolve the problem, how they've gone about solving that, the research journey so far, and of course, the rapport building stuff and, where you're from, you're looking forward to the summer, any holidays planned, all that sort of stuff, right at the very start. But there's that golden 2/3. And then the final third is then the supplier talking about how they can answer those challenges and needs. What that does is, number one, it shows that you're listening and that you care about the client, which is really important. Secondly, it also gives a great platform for follow-up and next steps as well. But it gives you a really good platform because naturally then, when you're talking about how you can address those problems, there's a very natural, let's have another conversation about that, or let's talk about a proposal around that or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to talk about this idea of getting the decision makers all on the same page. One of the things that I see with our clients is they go in and they pitch to, say, like the marketing manager, and the marketing manager's like, this is great, we're totally on board with it, it's within budget, they're super excited. I just need to go and speak to so-and-so, and then they kind of take what they've heard and try and pitch it to somebody else, and it kind of goes around the houses, and then they lose control of that conversation, and it's sort of in the client's court rather than in their court. So what are some sort of best practices around getting all the decision makers on the same page and staying in control of that sales conversation?
The first tip I'd say is that quite a lot of that work happens before you enter the room. So I'd highly recommend just taking a step back and thinking about how your product or service helps so let's say that the ideal client is the CMO, marketing director, marketing manager. How is it going to help, for example, the CFO? So how can they see a return on that investment? How can they optimize the capital and the cash that the company has? So wearing the kind of CFO hat, how can you benefit them? The second, and then going on to maybe even, probably should start there, the CEO, for example. So how will the CEO benefit from this? If the CEO was in the meeting, what sort of questions would they be asking? What would be on their mind? How can you benefit them? Even the procurement, the procurement director, head of procurement, and going through that C-suite, that general C-suite, and answering that question, what would be on their mind? If you were them, what would they say? And then how would it benefit them as stakeholders? So before you've entered any room or any sales conversation or any first meeting environment, those questions have been answered. That is going to hugely help, because typically what will happen, as you say, is that your main contact will love it, but they will then need to go inside their own organization around those people and convince those people that this is the way forward as well.
Yeah. And if I struggle with any of those questions, like I ask myself that question and I'm just drawing a blank, what's a good strategy to find the answers?
I think certainly just even researching the role itself. So let's just forget about the product or service or how you can benefit. Literally going on to Google and just searching Chief Executive Officer. What do they do? How do they behave? What are they responsible for? Can be a little bit boring, but even a job description. If you search around, Indeed and all these other sort of job sites, etc., there should be jobs there for those different roles, and you can see the job description and what they'd be responsible for. So then having those bullet points and essentially then mapping your product and service to those bullet points as well.
And I'm guessing this is where something like ChatGPT potentially could come in useful.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That's definitely another angle as well, to use generative AI, where you can use that as well. And, really the key is having those bullet points of what those people do, and then linking your product or service to that. And I totally agree. Generative AI platforms, definitely. And then the process of going through that as well will help kind of formulate that. So then when you're in that environment where the marketing manager is just like, this is amazing, this is fantastic, but, have you got any recommendations on how I can get this past the CFO, or what my chief exec may say, or something like that? They have those answers. Now, by the way, typically the main contact won't even say that. That'll be going through their mind though. So if you have those already, it's a huge, huge help. And what you're essentially doing is you're building a business case for your product or service. And it's very much a high value, high ROI. As I say, can be a bit boring, I'll be honest, but the return on it could be massive, because the downside of not doing that, as you say, is your clients, Matt, will be thinking, I'm having all these fantastic conversations, but nothing's happening. There's something wrong with me, or there's something wrong with the product or service. And actually, the product or service is great. It's actually more of a, how can you then go into the step 2, step 3, step 4 of a typical sale?
Yeah, absolutely. And then what are some best practices of getting everybody in the same room? Because I know from my own experience, but also from talking to my clients, one of the hardest things is almost like Chinese whispers, where you say something to the marketing manager and then the marketing manager gives their version of that to the CTO, and the CTO kind of says, oh, the marketing manager said X, Y, and Z, and we should probably all have a meeting about it, but it never really becomes a priority. So are there any strategies, or is there any best practice for getting everybody in the room and making sure that everybody's seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to politely forget the idea of getting everyone in the room at the same time. If you were able to do that, then you're a business development genius, because everyone, particularly in those senior levels and those senior roles, the demand on the time of the CEO, the CMO, my sort of main point of contact is the CEO. So I work with CEOs, and they're just beyond busy. They're just so busy. So it is very, very difficult. I'm not saying it's impossible though, but it's just accepting, I think, that actually it's more of a divide and conquer strategy. So to answer the question, I think, firstly is, getting everyone in the same room at the same time is very, very challenging. However, what you can do is focus, and I sort of use the phrase divide and conquer. So, where are we at with the marketing team? Are they happy? Are they convinced? Fantastic. Where are we at with the finance team? Are they happy? Do we even have engagement? Do we even have contact there? If so, are they happy? Are they engaged? Where are we at with those senior management levels? Might not get to meet the CEO, but, what would the CEO think? Have we given the answers to those people? And then even if, we can get access, can we get 15 minutes? Even if it's part of a board meeting or something like that, or on the same day as a board meeting, that type of thing. So it's really a sort of a divide and conquer strategy. The other thing I'd say as well is, when you're spanning those teams, one of the things that's really, especially in larger businesses, you talked about corporates, the level of communication between those stakeholders can vary as well. So what you might end up doing is being a very helpful kind of update communication pathway for those stakeholders, because I've seen it quite a few times in my career where, let's say we need those 7 people, I've got 3 of them in the room, they then start up catching up on things that are outside of the topic that we're talking about, but they found it really, really helpful because you bring them together and you're updating everyone. So it's having regular updates as well. This is where we're at. This is the conversation that I had. That's hugely helpful, because typically the larger the business, the more complex the organizational structure. So if they're clear on what's happening, what the latest update is, that's really valuable as well.
Yeah. How do I find out who those stakeholders are?
LinkedIn's quite a good source, finding that way. Another good platform is having, and this requires a good level of rapport. I wouldn't recommend asking this question straight off the bat, but your main stakeholder, your main champion, as we sometimes call them, working with them on that. And that will also help them, not just on the actual stakeholder map and who's who, but also how they buy as an organization. I was talking about how corporates typically buy, and it's usually through a process. I've worked with procurement teams before where I've gone, okay, great, well, let's map out your buying process step by step. And when I've done that with them, they've gone, this has been a really helpful meeting. I mean, look, we're interested in your solution, but actually you're able to map out how we buy as an organization. That's been really, really helpful as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. It just reminds me how much effort selling to corporates is. And I think that's like a lot of our clients, it feels almost a little bit like the lottery in a sense that you can put all of this time and effort and energy in upfront only to be told all the way further down the line that they've chosen somebody else. Like, is there anything that you've seen in your career that are shortcuts, hacks, like anything to help you stand out from the competition, to maybe bypass that procurement process in some way or alter it, or like the example you just gave, advise them so that they go, oh, actually, this person's a little bit different than anybody else?
Yeah, definitely. Firstly, on your point around the investment of time, you're so right. And yeah, look, there have been times in my career where we've put that effort in and we've just been beaten to the post kind of thing by a competitor or another solution, and it happens. Hopefully, when your clients are doing that, and when engaging corporates and enterprises, there's obviously a higher reward for that effort potentially, but it can be high risk, as you say, because the amount of effort that's required going into that. In terms of a kind of a hack or a shortcut, one of the great ways about sort of doing this is looking at your product and service and saying, well, okay, look, if we've got the sort of the fantastic platinum package or whatever it might be, how can we break that down to smaller chunks, but not only smaller chunks, but really sort of bite-sized engagements that are going to deliver value? There's going to be a monetary exchange, but is not so intensive on an overall process, because typically the higher the price and the cost, the more complex the process. And some of your clients might get, you talked about lottery, some of your clients might get fortunate where, you can work with private organizations that are of a good size, 500 people, 1,000 people, where they have significant budget, but they don't actually have to go through those processes and those steps. But generally, it's a really good practice to just look at, can we do small things? Because typically, as I say, there will be spend limit levels as well. So a marketing manager, for example, will have a spend limit. Their boss, let's say a marketing director, may have a spend limit. The CMO then may have a spend limit. The CEO could, depending on the organization, have a spend limit. So these controls and procedures are in place, but if you can fly under those controls a little bit, you can then get what could be two things. Number one, a very powerful reference, because we talked about references. So, logo for the website, etc. Fantastic. But secondly, you're now a supplier. So going to a procurement team, your main contact, it's easier because they can say, well, like they're already supplying us stuff. We've issued this purchase order and they're on the system and that kind of thing. So, there are a couple of hacks, I'd say.
Yeah, I think the second thing that you're talking about there is really important and very undervalued. It's something that we talk about as a logical next step, and it's really that gap between that kind of like initial interaction and the core offer, because the core offer for our clients is often 50K plus, and many a times we're helping clients to land six-figure projects, and everything you're talking about here kind of falls into that category. But what we help people to do is exactly what you said. We design that logical next step where the client is exchanging some time, money, and energy, and they're getting value, they're getting insights, they're getting breakthroughs, they're getting closer towards that goal. But as you said, it's kind of under that spend limit, or it's something that doesn't need to be approved by X, Y, and Z in order to get through. And it's, I can't emphasize how much of a powerful strategy it is. And so is there any, or are there any tips or anything that you use in order to come up with like what that project might be or how to create that bridge?
Yeah. So as we're sort of talking about, slightly back to the golden 2/3 stuff, is what are the biggest kind of pains that the client is going through? What are the typical pain points? Pain point's an interesting phrase. Well, I've been in a few meetings recently where the client, the buyer, has actually used this phrase pain point because they're trained as well. They're trained to buy, so they're also going through training on how to buy and how to assess the market and things like that. So what are the biggest pain points? What are the biggest challenges? And I would say certainly for your clients, Matt, and for prospective clients, they'll know that. They'll have a good idea of why a customer would invest, $50K at 6 figures plus in a solution. And then say, okay, well, that particular pain point, how could we address that, but in a high value, but slightly lower investment of time and cost by ourselves, for example? I mean, a good way of sometimes doing this is using online platforms, and the kind of the e-learning space. I know that's sort of outside of this podcast, but, surfacing, getting exclusive access to insight. Another really good, and I know you've done this yourself, Matt, is books. So to have a book out, which shows kind of knowledge and expertise and is a way for clients to get value, but also drive that engagement. But typically, when I work with clients, it is sometimes a workshop as well, where, again, it's getting those people in the room, it's getting more interaction, it's getting you more visible in the organization, and then there is obviously a cost to that. Sometimes in more of the software and product space, it's a free trial, so a certain amount of time where, the customer can access the product and the full product, typically, that goes down quite well for a period of time. So it's really giving that sort of value, or even a paid engagement with that as well. So there is a free version, but actually you can pay this small fee and get access to it for a certain amount of time. There's various different ways of doing it depending on the business, but it really starts with that client problem, in my opinion. What are they really facing? What's the biggest one or the biggest 2 or 3? How could we package something that is going to be valuable, when there's a price to that? It's actually, people nod their head and go, yeah, like that makes a lot of sense. But also it's not the kind of the full, huge engagement that's going to have the longer sales cycle.
Yeah. And it helps with a lot of things like cash flow, for example, because I know we previously discussed that problem, that sometimes the lead time on these engagements is so long that you go for many months without actually having any cash in the bank, which can be problematic. So I think the logical next step really helps with that. And in terms of some other ideas for people, I find that usually a logical next step is part of a process that you're already doing. So if you're a film production studio, for example, and maybe your initial thing that you do with people is research around their target audience, or you do some research around their story and what makes them different. And like you said, you run a workshop and you examine their story and you challenge them on that. And then maybe you put a storyboard together. You could actually pull that off and have that as a standalone piece of value that you offer people to kind of get them moving in the right direction and almost kind of get them before anybody else does, because they're working on that process now with you. And that stops somebody else coming in and saying, well, we're going to take you on this whole journey. It's like, well, we're kind of doing this work with this person at the moment. And so it's a little bit like dating. It's like you're dating this person at the moment. So, if I'm not and I'm single, I'll start dating this person. At least that's how I date anyway. But I know everyone has different ways of approaching that. But so that's kind of like one idea. And the other, one of my favorite questions that I used to ask in this kind of situation is, if we could only solve one problem in the next 30 days, what problem would you pick? And that often really gets
I like that.
the supplier. That really gets the client sort of thinking, oh, actually, where's the low-hanging fruit? What's the thing that's really top of the priority list for us? And it just brings that urgency forward. And okay, well, how about this? How about we did X, Y, and Z? Then, there's that kind of urgency and momentum rather than thinking about that long-term goal. So yeah, a few little tidbits there from me. So let's get back to this idea of kind of getting everyone on board, going through the process, et cetera, et cetera. Like, when you first engage with a corporate, or you first want to engage with a corporate, what are some of the things that you do to increase your chances of getting meetings with the right people?
It comes back to what would they be interested in? What major problem are they looking to solve? And then building some sort of insight around that. So I must get 3 or 4 emails and messages a day from people saying, and it's usually automated, you can probably tell, and there's bullet pointed and it goes, we're fantastic, we can do all this, please, I'd love to have a call with you. But actually, I think, that's fine. But because there's just so much noise and things happening in the marketplace, one of the best things to do is to essentially build that insight for the client and go, look, this is a white paper that we did on this particular area. You might find it interesting. If not, no worries at all. Just, have a great day. And people, naturally you'd think, well, that how is that? Is that really going to garner a response? But what you're saying there is you're saying, look, I really don't actually care if you reply to this or not. I care about you because you look like my clients, and I'm in this space and I help people in this space. Here is some insight. Here is some, it could even just be a blog post. We talked about doing a brief video perhaps, or whatever it might be on a certain topic. You might find this interesting. There you go. Have a look at that. Take care. Have a great day. That can work, I think, really, really well. The second thing I'd also say is I think sometimes people can look at business development, and with all the solutions that we've got nowadays, social platforms, content, etc., I think people can overcomplicate it a little bit. Sometimes there's nothing finer than actually just looking at your black book, right? Just looking at the network and being like, who do I know? Who is around? What I'd recommend to your clients, Matt, and I say this to my own clients, is when you sort of see someone, there's almost like a kind of a network around them, like a field, sort of a magnetic field of people that they also know. So when you have a contact that don't be surprised that they may know someone that you really want to speak to, or they know someone who then can connect you to someone who can introduce you to someone. That's also very, very powerful. And then obviously alongside that is, calling and just reaching out and saying hello. Now, what I would say is, again, that does vary in terms of the market and the environment. Typically what I find in the UK is that, people like to have that insight and to just do the research and know what they're looking at first and then engaging. And then there's other markets where actually the direct reach out is really appreciated and welcomed. It's like, well, you were thinking about us, and that, we really appreciate that. So I'd also say that is to sort of just bring it back to the basics and look at, the existing network, and then also reaching out with an insight and purposeful approach, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it's a really underrated strategy, and Daniel Priestley calls it with or without you energy. And I think if you can demonstrate that you're helping people in that space and you have some kind of insight, and you use the example of a white paper here, then it already positions you as an authority. You're authoring something in that space. You've put together some data that shows that you understand that space, and you're kind of just dropping it on the door, and you're kind of saying, hey, by the way, we created this, we do this for a bunch of people, you might find it interesting. I'm not actually asking you to do anything there. I'm literally just providing value. So I think that is a very underrated approach. And obviously, if you can not automate that in some way, but if you can use that as an asset that sits somewhere that is easily available to your target audience, then that makes that process even easier for you. And then the second thing I think I just want to touch on is around what you said about approaching people in your black book and contacts. I know I've suggested that strategy to a lot of people I've worked with. And the first question is always, well, what do I say? And but I don't think they need a website right now. And I just want to get your thoughts and opinion on that mindset that people have. Like, what are they missing?
Look, I think this area, sometimes it's almost coming from experience and confidence. So sometimes when you see sort of, younger kids, for example, sometimes they're a bit shy. I certainly was, right, when I was a younger person. It's just but you develop interactions, you see, and experience over time. So what I'd say is that really it comes from just kind of reaching out there and obviously experience. The big thing is, again, the phrase that I love is, we help, client name, with this. And then typically, so when I'm talking about, say, my own company, Forward Foundry, I say we help emerging technologies welcome their first 5 to 10 reference logos in the Middle East. So in that phrase, I'm saying that I help people, I help businesses. There's a defined outcome, right? So people can go, oh, okay, I get that. People understand that. And I found that when I speak to clients and say that, or prospective clients, they totally understand that. And they go, oh, great, fantastic. There's a natural, tell me more. That sounds quite interesting. So again, it's taking a step back and going, well, what are the major problems and challenges that, your clients and your prospective clients face? And then this is what we help them with. And then if you can put a defined outcome on that, that's also sort of supercharges the phrase. And to go even further, you could almost sort of say within a defined time period. Although the time period, tends to vary by client, etc. But that's certainly something that I think could be powerful.
Yeah, and I think we're almost getting onto a separate topic, which is how people pitch themselves and position themselves. And I think for creatives, this is a massive block, and everyone is so focused on what they sell rather than the outcome they create. And I think a lot of creatives, I know when I was running my agency, I didn't really know what outcome I created for people. Like, I knew that I could build websites, I knew that I could help people with their marketing, but I didn't really know what that then led to or what the consistent theme was around the outcome. So I feel like that could be a whole separate podcast episode. I want to talk to you about mindset, and I want to talk to you about how you think about business development and how you think about building relationships in general.
Yeah, I mean, so if I talk about my own business, Forward Foundry, in terms of I've talked about what we do, which is, helping emerging technologies win their first 5 to 10 reference logos and beyond in the Middle East. In terms of how we do that, we would work with them on what is the ideal client profile for them, and then what are the problems and challenges that they're solving. And then we sort of, regionalize that. So we go, well, what does that mean actually in Dubai, UAE, Saudi, etc., for the Middle East region? In terms of mindset, the reason I mentioned that is when we then go out to engage the market, one of the biggest things that we have is an abundance mindset. So the Middle East is I'm going to be biased, but I just love living there, being based there. It's just an incredible, growing, transforming place with many, many different companies, organizations, service providers. There are a lot of companies in the region that are looking for technology, and they're looking to solve problems with technology. So every time that we reach out to the market when we're representing a client, it's having that mentality, because if we just had the mentality where we thought, well, actually, there's only 5 businesses that would find this valuable, and we know 2 of them, or we know 1 of them, that's a really scary place to be, right? It's like, well, those 5 phone calls have got to be world-class phone calls for this to work. Whereas if then you flipped it and go, well, there's thousands and thousands of companies out there that we could provide value to, that really changes the mindset. And I think that then that mindset filters through to the engagement itself. We talked about, here's some insight. I don't mind if you reply to this or not. Here you go. Take care. It then goes through to the first meeting. So I've enjoyed this conversation. How can I help you? If I can't help you, fine. No worries at all. Thanks very much. It's been great. It filters through to the business development process. Now, the opposite of that is a scarcity mindset. And I think, by the way, this is from the book, The Growth Mindset by Carol Dweck. So I just wanted to get that reference in because, the scarcity mindset is then, well, actually, yeah, there's only 5 businesses or there's only a few people that I can help. I've only got a few clients. So I'm not that big. I'm small and the world is not that big and small. But there's trillions of dollars. I don't know the exact numbers, but I'm sure there's trillions of dollars that are just like, as we speak, floating around the world now, being sent from, between countries for different services, different products right now. So I think that's a really important mindset to have. So I think your audience will be thinking, well, how do you get that mindset? I think it's just also going through this business development process and finding the ideal client profile and mapping out all those organizations, because it would surprise you. I think in my experience, my clients don't do that. And so they can think, generally, I'm quite lucky. My clients are quite sort of forward thinking and have already got that mindset. But typically that you can fall into where you don't have that mindset, you have a scarcity mindset. So go on, my friend.
Well, I was going to say, what do you do if and when you find yourself falling into that scarcity mindset? Let's say you've had 10 conversations and all of a sudden it feels like nothing's going your way. And if you ever catch yourself thinking in that way, is there a particular technique or is there anything that you do to get yourself back into the abundance mindset?
Yeah, definitely. Look, I mean, in business development, you're going to get a lot of no's. You're not going to make 10 phone calls and get 10 yeses. So there are going to be closed doors. And I think knowing that and accepting that, I think, is firstly really, really important. So if those 10 no's become 100 no's or 500 no's, whatever I do, whatever client or market that I'm working in, I'm always got my eyes and ears open for feedback. So what's the market telling me about? And we represent technologies where they've built fantastic businesses in the UK, Europe, USA. So far, we're getting good traction, but, there may be an instance where actually, just for whatever reason, and I know of some stories where, technologies have tried to open in the region and it just hasn't, for whatever reason, hasn't been a success. Or there was another competitor they were not aware of that is actually far bigger in the region, and that's why they're struggling for traction. But really, it's just having ears open for feedback and then tailoring every phone call, every interaction for each piece of feedback. I think the temptation when you're falling into that scarcity mindset is to just keep doing the same thing and just keep sort of banging the door. And to keep pushing and having tenacity is very, very valuable. But you also have to just pair it with that feedback and with that tailoring of what's the market saying, what's the market really looking for? Is there actually a need that I thought I was solving, but actually there's this sort of other need over here that could be really valuable as well that we could solve.
How do you not take no's and rejection personally?
I think it's back to that abundance mentality. I just know that there's trillions of dollars out there that are changing hands all the time. So, if one engagement doesn't go so well or one particular meeting, doesn't go that well, it happens, it's life, no worries at all. We're moving on to the next one. And actually, I also know that when I come to that next one and it goes well, it's going to be even sweeter because, if it was all great and good, then, those, when you speak to someone out of the blue really and say, look, we've got this amazing technology here. Do you want to see it? And they go, yeah, like sure, fantastic. Come, let's meet at this time and date. It's really special because you're right at the start of the business development process. So yeah, it makes the wins nicer as well. So I hope I've answered that question, Matt. But yeah, that could go in many directions.
Yeah, well, tell me about the importance of creating more opportunities than you need.
Yeah, it's a really good one. So what I'd recommend is when we're looking at business development, it's often a balance of risk and a law of averages. So what we typically do with clients is, and some of your audience may have heard of the business development funnel, but typically every business development activity is really a funnel where you've got these kind of conversations at the top where even the insight stuff, like, I think this is quite interesting. There's then the first meeting to go, well, look, I'm going to give an hour of my time for you. That's the first meeting. There's then typically the proposal stage. There's typically then the, negotiation stage. And then there's the welcoming of the client stage. And then similar to your 6-step model, Matt, that you were talking about. So the ideal that you'd want is that the very top of that funnel, it's almost like, let's just really strip it back to say a bottle of water. So if we've got a bottle of water and a funnel and we're going to pour water into it, what we'd want is for that water to just be wildly overflowing, because then as we get more down into this funnel, there's going to be a higher chance of a close rate of a client typically. So if the top of the funnel is quite lean and there's not a lot going on there, then that increases the risk that actually at the bottom of the funnel there's not going to be a lot there. So if you could really load that top of the funnel as much as possible, that can then really increase the chances of more clients coming through. In terms of how you do that, that sort of goes back to obviously what we do with our clients, which is mapping out the ideal client profile. What are their problems and challenges? What industries, sectors, markets, countries would this be relevant in? And then engaging the market.
So is there a big piece there around, even if you feel like a deal is coming off and it's going to close, or even if you've just closed a deal, there's a certain level of input that you stick to no matter what?
Yeah. In terms of activity and engagement?
Yeah, like top of funnel activity, yeah.
Yeah, it's a really important topic because I have seen in my career some salespeople, business development professionals that have done extremely well, and they've got that big deal over the line, that big corporate, the big enterprise customer, fantastic, and everyone's clapping and cheering and brilliant, great stuff. Big sigh of relief, great, okay, right, how are we going to deliver this now going into that? But whilst all of that is going on, there's not that top of the funnel activity happening. And the sad thing about business development and sales is that you'll only feel that later down the line. So you've got to be still doing that business development activity. So typically in business development, you have the kind of the hunter and the farmer, right? In terms of general roles. Hunters being they're out there, they're getting new business, they're prospecting, they may be doing the networking stuff, the perhaps a bit of cold calling, insight stuff, etc., and getting those first meetings and winning those clients. And then usually a farmer role is much more looking after the customer, making sure the service is right, making sure it's being delivered properly, etc. And usually, depending on the organization and the size of the business, especially if it's a startup or it's the founder and the CEO, you have to do both of those things at the same time. And not allocating enough time to do the business development, like I say, can be very dangerous for your business. But the only thing is, the important aspect is that you'll only feel that 3 to 4 months down the line, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, and often that's too late, right? Because it's like a lag metric. Exactly.
So now you're like, oh no, we've got nothing in the pipeline at the top of the funnel. We've got to get going again. But actually, the sales process to get going again and the sales cycle is 3 to 6 to months to a year. So that can really affect things.
Yeah, and that's what creates that sort of feast and famine, right?
Yeah, how you solve that is really interesting. I think at a CEO founder level, it's almost just being aware of that and having the discipline and the desire and the drive to balance that. It's looking at how can you outsource things where the other tasks and other areas to release time for business development, because business development does take time. In the software world, what's quite common is actually having a whole entire role and division for looking after the client. So what you typically see is a business development sales force winning customers, and then once they've been won on a particular subscription deal, for example, they're then handed over to a customer success team and a customer success manager that's then looking after them. And I think that model could work well. There is a cost to that and a complexity, and it is a model, but I find that both areas are, they're pretty night and day, to be honest. I mean, obviously the relationship aspect is important, but they're two different worlds. So if you've got different resources for those worlds, I think that can work quite well.
Yeah, absolutely, man. James, it's been an absolute pleasure digging into the world of sales and business development with you. Where can people connect with you? Where can they find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. Please drop me an ad on LinkedIn, James Connelly, Forward Foundry. Website's forwardfoundry.io. Check us out. Would love to connect with you. So that's how people can find us. And we also have a YouTube channel, Forward Foundry YouTube channel, recently launched. So do check us out on YouTube as well.
Awesome, man. We will drop all of those links in the show notes below. James, thank you so much for being a guest today.
Thank you, Matt.
Before you leave, if you found this episode valuable, please hit the subscribe button. Also, if you are a creative business owner doing more than 10K a month and you want to grow and scale without working longer hours or hiring a massive team, then I have something you may be interested in. We have just developed a tool that will give you a custom growth strategy based on exactly where you are in your business right now. So you can stop consuming lots of random content and trying to figure things out on your own and actually get something personalized to you. You will also receive a free copy of my book, and it will point out relevant chapters. If you'd like to take the scorecard, it's totally free. You just have to click the link in the show notes or connect with me on LinkedIn, and you will see a link in my bio. Thanks for listening. This is the Creative Courage Podcast.